Hey crew, welcome back to the workshop. Artisan Pirate here, and in today's fun custom project video, I'm going to be showing you my preferred method for making beautiful and creative and very unique half-lap picture frames. These are a great way to add an added elegance to a photo, to a scroll saw portrait, to a laser cut portrait. It always takes projects when you make a custom frame for them to the next level, and the style of frame that I like to make is always very popular, and it always gets a lot of comments over on the social media feeds. As a matter of fact, a lot of you guys have reached out to me and said to please make a video on how I make them, and I'm going to do the best that I can in today's video to show you that process from start to finish. So I do apologize if the intro where I explain everything here is a little more longer than normal and more drawn out than normal, if that makes any sense. But I made my very first pseudo half-lap picture frame way back before I started over here on the YouTube platform, and I made this one for the Artisan Pirate promo photo that my pops took of me down in the basement in one of the stores in the local downtown. They let me go down there and get up on this old dilapidated elevator here, and I got a photo. It looked very rustic, so I made this frame here, and this one here is based on a portrait frame that Steve Ramsey at Woodworking for Mere Mortals made years and years ago. It's made from just a little more than a 1/4 inch thick shipping crate slats, and you can see how I've just got the portrait screwed in there, you know, with some strips there, and this hangs in my mom's kitchen because she has a tropical and beach flair, and she likes having this portrait of me displayed. I went and got it from her, as well as the next portrait I am going to show you guys. But this was the first one that I ever made, and it got the wheels turning in my head to make a better half-lap frame for myself out here in the workshop. The one I just showed you out of the shipping crate slats was totally cool, totally unique, and one of a kind, but it was a little more tedious for me personally to make. I wanted to design one that I could quickly knock out in a custom manner out here in the workshop, and I've got a scroll saw portrait I done a couple years ago here, and I finished it in a totally different and unique way, so I don't want to show it to you guys yet. But here is the portrait itself. Of course, I'm looking at the actual finished side, but we're going to make a frame to this size in today's video, and hopefully once we get to the end where we close the video, we will have a half-lap portrait just like this beautiful one. This was my mom's handmade Christmas present. Again, I went and picked it up from her, you know, and it is a tropical octopus down in the ocean depths, and all of this was handmade by me. I cut everything out. This is a pattern I picked up off of the Etsy website, but the half-lap picture frame here was totally of my own doing. You have the interlocking pieces, kind of like old school wooden Lincoln logs, if anybody remembers those, and then I wrapped some twine around it for a nautical and maritime flair. So this is the goal of what I'm going to try to be teaching you guys to make out in your garage or workshops. And you're going to need some primary tools. You're going to, of course, need a table saw to mill your material down, and a router table with a straight bit. And anytime you use those machines, just make sure you don't have no loose clothing or jewelry. I do have my bracelets on and my watch on, but though they are tight to my skin to where they're not dangling or anything. And I like to make these frames out of completely upcycled construction grade 2x4s. I've got a few of them laying off to the side here, so we're going to have to do some prep work by milling them down into 1-inch square strips just like this. This is a great size to handle safely and comfortably out in your garage or workshop, especially when you're feeding it through the table saw, you're feeding it through the router table. But again, I think they make great frames because you start with that 2x4, you move to this, and then you ultimately end up with this here. So really cool, really creative. Now half-lap, as I said, is kind of like Lincoln logs, so we're going to have to be using this fit finder. Now of course you can not use a jig. You can take very careful measurements over at your table saw and router table to cut the dados where the pieces will interlock. But I like using this fit finder that I got at the Clean Spoil Woodworking Extravaganza over at the Micro Jig booth. They gave it to me for a great deal. I did purchase this. They had it on sale. But as you can see here in the photo, it gives you the half of a dimension. So of course, half of the dimension of 1 inch would be 1/2 inch. But you set the jig on it, and it sets the second lever over to 1/2 inch or whatever the half thickness of your material is, so you can take it over to your table saw, your table, whatever you have, and dial it in precisely. So what we need to do now is move the camera off of the table saw, because that is where we are going to begin by milling down some upcycled 2x4s to 1-inch square strips. So let's get started. And over here at the Rikon table saw, we're going to begin by removing the rounded edges off of these 2x4s, and then I'll begin making the 1-inch square strips here, being as safe as possible while milling the materials down. With these pieces here, I'll get 6 total 1-inch square strips for our half-lap frame, and even though I only need 4, it'll give us a couple extra where you can do test cuts with, or if you just happen to need a spare. But now over here on the workbench, I will measure for the half laps that we will be cutting back over at the table saw, and I'm just marking here, and this will be our first half lap cut. But after I'm happy with the measurements here, we will set up the table saw for the half lap with the half lap jig. You can see how I am doing that there, and I am dialing the table saw blade in perfectly and locking it in place. And I'll cut 2 of the strips at one time, and you could totally do this with a dado stack if you wanted to, but I'm doing multiple passes with just the single table saw blade here, and testing the fit with a scrap piece of 1-inch material. And I'll cut everything down to its final size later on in the video. But now we have our first set of half laps, and now I can double check my measurements back on the workbench before measuring for the shorter sides here that will complete the half lap process and the interlocking feature of this custom frame. But now it will be a rinse and repeat process back over at the Rikon table saw. Again, I'll do test fits to make sure everything is fitting together properly. And then all of the half lap cuts will be done for this project. And I can do my first dry fit here over on the workbench, and you can see how they interlock like Lincoln logs. And now I can also mark which edge gets the rabbet over at the Craftsman router, and this will allow the portrait we are gluing in to float. And I'm using a 1/2 inch straight bit here in the router, and the first 2 are straightforward routing procedures, but the final 2 sides you have to cut into the actual half lap you made, so just be aware of that. And you'll see me doing that here. So I'm going into it just a little bit over, because that's where I will put the string in later. But all of the router work will now be done, and it is now time to cut the frame to its final size. And I like to have an inch overhang all the way around, but you could of course totally cut this flush if you just wanted to make a traditional frame. I just think it adds an elegance and style to portraits and the frames themselves. But now we can glue everything up, and I'll be using medium grade CA glue and activator, and the half laps are basically self-squaring. And if you make any of your half laps too big, don't worry about that, because you can cut a shim and slide it into the gap. But after the frame was dry, I sanded everything up nice and smooth. People have always asked me how I make these frames, and I hope this video explains the process well. But now it will be time for painting, and I'll use a muddy brown Rust-Oleum spray paint here, and I'll make sure all the surfaces are covered, and I'll let it dry by the wood stove. But after the frame was dry to the touch, it was time to finally glue the portrait in. And we used, again, more medium grade CA glue and activator from Klingspor Woodworking Shop. And I allowed it around 5 minutes to completely dry and cure after putting a little bit of weight on it. And then it was time for finishing with Rust-Oleum clear gloss. And again, I don't want to spoil what the portrait is. I want to show that as we close the video. But I will give it a few coats of Rust-Oleum clear gloss and let that dry. And when it was dry to the touch, it was time to do the final bit and add the string on the corner. And this is a totally optional step, and I'll only wrap 2 of the corners here to show you guys the process. But that's why I let the rabbets over on the router table extend, so I have a place to tuck the ends of the string in. But after I wrapped all 4 corners, the project was complete and I was ready to show off the portrait. Okay, crew, we are finally done with the half-lap picture frame, and are you ready to see the finished result with the custom scroll saw portrait glued into it and everything complete? Here it is, my friends, and I hope you all enjoyed watching the video from start until now as we are getting ready to close it. I cut this out in 2024 by stack cutting, and I'll show you the original one that I made, but I wanted to go about it in a different way when it came to finishing. The 1/4-inch plywood was great for adding some acrylic craft paints to make the beautiful fish jumping out of the ocean, to make it have some great and beautiful colorful detail with the colors I chose. And I knew when I made this in this manner that I would want to make an even better custom frame, if that makes any sense, as opposed to just the traditional 45-degree mitered corners on traditional frames. But you can see how the corners came out where I wrapped them with that wax twine. That is just a spin I put on it that goes all the way back to that original Pirate picture frame I showed you at the beginning of the video when I watched Steve Ramsey's video years and years ago. And I think this just adds a nice elegance to it. You can see on the back here how where the rabbit that I did over at the router table went a little bit farther, and that was so I could tuck the 2 ends of the twine in and glue them in place to kind of lock them in place for display and everything. But the Rust-Oleum clear gloss really made everything pop and stand out. I'm going to show you the original one I made, and what I originally done. Now this is a Russ Beard scroll saw pattern, so thank you, Russ, for the beautiful and creative design here. But what I did back around November of 2024, I wanted to cut one of these out for my mom for a Christmas present, and also for a family friend that loves the beach and lives at the beach part-time, you know, for their Christmas present. So I stack cut 3 of these over at the Rikon scroll saw out of 1/4-inch plywood, and I finished 2 of them in this manner. I also went to my mom. I kind of went through and just grabbed everything, but this one here was the one I made for her, and it's got "To Mom from me. Love you so much. Merry Christmas 2024. So that's how long I've had this one here just sitting around waiting for the frame to be made. And of course I took my time painting it with the acrylic craft paints, and you can see here the difference in ways you can finish a scroll saw project and also add a beautiful textured frame to it. Again, made completely from upcycled construction grade 2x4s. Now I can take it over to the laser if I want to present this to someone or give it to someone, which I have in mind to do, to give it to a store for them to display. But I can go back here and engrave something with the laser engraver, like my logo or 2, or thank you so much for everything, or custom made 3 of 3, you know, since I stack cut 3 of them. Or I could just put a nice piece of felt on the back to make it look that much more professional. This twine we have had forever. Last summer I actually used it to tie up the cherry tomatoes I grew out on the back deck, and I knew it would be good for wrapping around here, because for the portraits I was making, again I'll show you this one here, I felt it fit that tropical and nautical flair I was going to, like it was in a sea shanty tavern or something like that. So that was the idea I had in my mind's eye. But with this one here, I think it came out great. Now, of course, I've also got another idea in my head with the lighter brown of the spray paint. With the others I've shown you, I stain them with Minwax wood stain, but with the light brown of the spray paint, you could use different colored twines to wrap around the corners here. Of course, you know, the sky is the limit when it comes to how you finish a project. You could leave the half laps natural. Of course, the half laps were dialed in with the micro jig half lap gauge here over at the table saw. A very cool tool and creative tool to have out in a garage or workshop to go in conjunction with the router table or the table saw for making half laps a breeze. Of course, you do not need this. This is just something that makes the workflow in the workshop go that much more quicker and smoother. You could, of course, take careful measurements, and of course, we cut those 2x4s down into one inch square strips, excuse me. So I knew right off the top of my head, half of that depth would be only half an inch for those half laps to interlock. And the cool thing about half laps is they are kind of self-squaring. So you can see here the frame is perfectly at right angles to the portrait, and it fits in there snugly. Now it will have to completely dry overnight with the clear coat. It's still a little bit tacky in some areas, but then I can put a hook on it or take it to the laser and engrave a nice quote or verse or something on the back if I choose to give this to someone. Again, I have in my mind's eye to give it to someone, but the half lap frames are just so cool and creative. And when I made the original one, the one here is not the original one I made in 2025. I actually made one in 2024 for a dinosaur portrait, and when I posted it, I give it to a family member, but when I posted it, everyone was like, please do a video on how you make these custom half lap frames. So that is what this video is all about. Of course, over at your table saw when milling down small material, or over at your router table routing small material, just be as safe as you can. When I was over at them, I had on safety glasses from Klingspor Woodworking Shop, the blue ones they offer, and everything. But I hope, in your guys' opinions, everything came out nice and crisp here. And I really love the nautical nature of this beautiful and creative fish out of water. I think it's a marlin design. Swordfish is what I call it because of the nose. But a really cool way to also finish scroll saw projects in a unique way. Again, got a lot of stuff sitting around here. This is just finishing scroll saw projects in the traditional manner. Cutting the project out, sanding it up nice and smooth, putting a stain on it, putting a backer board on it, and putting a frame on it, but with a little bit of thought process outside of the box, and with a little bit of time, practice, artistic flair, and patience, you can make a beautiful and creative design just like this. And I hope in some way, shape, or form, from the intro of the video until now as we are closing it, you guys picked up a tip, trick, or tidbit on making a custom half lap frame out in your garage or workshop. But as always, I thank you all for following along, and that's going to about wrap it up for this one. And if you're new to the channel, hopefully you'll click that subscribe button and follow me across all my social media feeds under the Artisan Pirate name. As always, links to contact me as well as all my social media links will always be linked down in the description box below these videos. That's about all for this one, crew, and remember guys, if I can make it or do it, so can you guys. I'm the Artisan Pirate. Take care, and I'll see you guys real soon.